Well, good morning. It's good to see all of you this morning. And seriously, I just want to say thank you. We've been talking a lot about the transition this morning. And for those of you that continue to show up and gather in community Sunday after Sunday, even though it's out of the ordinary and out of the normal, we really appreciate you being here. For those of you who are watching us online this morning, we are glad that you are with us as well, always. But it was not made, the online presence wasn't made to replace being part of community. And so if you are online this morning and can be with us next week, we encourage you to do that. We're going to start a new series this morning called Some of Life's Best Lessons. I want you to think for just a minute, regardless of whether you've been on this earth for 10 years or whether you've been on this earth closer to 100 years, what are some of the lessons that life has taught you while you've been here? And most of them, you're immediately going to go to things you've learned the hard way, right? But things about life that you've learned as you've just gone through the journey. So this week, I started thinking about that, and I made a list of some things that life has taught me, some of life's best lessons that I thought I would share with you. Just a few of them this morning. I certainly don't want to expose myself too much to share all of them, but I'll share a few of them with you. So here's the first one I thought of. Life has taught me this lesson. Never attempt to feed a turtle out of your hand. I was a little boy, stumbled upon a turtle, thought I would be a good Samaritan and try to feed it because it was obviously hungry. I don't know how I thought that or why I knew that. Tried to gather together some grass clippings, put them in my hand, reached down to the turtle, and the thing bit me and wouldn't let go. I remember running into the house screaming and shaking it like that made things better, right? With this turtle dangling off my finger. Here's another life lesson I've learned. It's never a good idea, regardless of the reward from the dare, it's never a good idea to pee on a hot wire fence. Just take my word for it. I learned something else this week. This is a life lesson I learned just this week. My wife, Amy, would prefer I use the word TT. That's a life lesson I learned just this week. Another life lesson I've learned, do not put aluminum in the microwave unless you want to watch a good show. As I had, got married, began to have kids, here's a life lesson I learned. Don't ever say, I will never let my kids do that. Because you will let your kids do every one of those things that you say you will never let your kids do. I will never let my kids sleep in bed with me. On night 10 of no sleep, you will do whatever it takes. You will give them ice cream. You will do whatever it takes. Don't ever say that. Here's another thing that I've learned about kids. Don't tell your kids things that you don't want other people to know. Because they will share them at the most inopportune times. Amy and I, at one point in our lives, taught a children's Sunday school class. We learned more things about you. In fact, those of you who have kids across the street right now, we're learning things about you you may not want us to know. Here's another thing that I've learned in life. It's not just about the destination, it's about the journey. In fact, I would say it's more about the journey than it is about the destination. So I've been a little bit vulnerable with you this morning, so I'm going to be a little bit more vulnerable with you and just tell you that the last 3 months of my life have been a journey. God called me to preach 10 years ago, and so I've been doing this for 10 years now, and the last 3 months have been some of the hardest part of that journey I've ever been on. It doesn't just have to do with the transition over here and what God's calling us to and leading to 3 services and planning new campuses. It doesn't have anything to do with that, or it's not just about that. There's just something happening in my life right now that God is doing. He's trying to get my attention, and what I'm learning is that it's not necessarily about where I'm headed, it's about where I'm at. And God is trying to teach me lessons along the journey. And so for the next several weeks, we're going to talk about these lessons that God's people, the Israelites, learned on their journey. You've heard a little bit about that this morning, but God's people were given the promised land. And what should have taken them 11 days to get to ended up taking them 40 years. And during that 40 years, during their journey in the wilderness, God taught them some incredible lessons. And I think one of the lessons He taught them is that it's not just about the destination, it's about the journey. And so this morning, I want to share with us 3 things that help us make the most of the journey. It's not just about the destination, it's about the journey. So let's talk about 3 things that help us make the most of the journey. I'm going to be in the book of Exodus. During this time, these last 3 months, God has had me reading just by coincidence. I don't know, it's not a coincidence, it's a God thing, but He's had me reading through the first 5 books of the Old Testament. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And when you read through these 5 books, you get this vision of the promised land and the journey that God's people went on. And so for a few weeks now, we're going to take you through part of this. And I'm going to start in Exodus chapter 3 this morning. And then we're going to go to Exodus chapter 16, Exodus chapter 19. So if you got a Bible, you can keep it open in front of you or your phone, or I think they're actually going to be on the screen over my head. But here's the first thing I would share with us this morning. To make the most of the journey, we have to have a picture of where we're headed. We have to have a visual image of where we're going. We have to know what the destination is. And so I want you to see in Exodus chapter 3, verse 1, it says, "Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. And he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And then the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush." And if you skip down to verse 7, you see this. "The Lord said, out of that bush, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites." I want you to see this picture that God is giving to Moses. Moses was not the first person to get this picture. Abraham would inherit the promised land. That was in Genesis chapter 15. That declaration was confirmed to his son Isaac in Genesis chapter 26, and then to his grandson Jacob in Genesis chapter 28. And then it was Abraham's great-grandson Joseph who ended up leading the people to Egypt. And there, over time in Egypt, they became slaves to Pharaoh, slaves to the Egyptian, and they longed for something better. They longed to be anywhere other than where they were at. And God had given them this picture, this vision of what that place was. And now He comes to Moses, who used to be in Egypt and then fled to the desert, to the wilderness. And in the wilderness, this burning bush comes and begins to speak to Moses. It says, "Moses, you're the man. You're the one I've chosen to lead my people to the promised land. You're the one I've chosen that's going to take those people, my people, your people, to that place that's a good land flowing with milk and honey." That word flowing literally means gushing. All right, I want you to think about this. Right now, as you sit here, your blood is flowing through your veins and through your arteries. But if you were to cut yourself, especially a vein or an artery, your blood would gush out of that cut. When you come this way this morning, most of you have to come through the intersection of 98th and Indiana. Most of the time, water is flowing in that intersection. It's runoff from the sprinkler systems of businesses and houses, and there's usually not a day that water's not flowing in that intersection. But if it rains later today, water will be gushing in that intersection. You see, this is a land that was gushing with milk and honey. That visual, that picture of milk and honey just literally means good things. Milk and honey were good things. And so God is saying, listen, I told Abraham, I told Isaac, I told Jacob, now I'm telling you, Moses, your people are going to go to this place that's gushing with good things. The visual, the image. You see, we have to have a picture in our head of where we're headed. So I would ask you this morning, what is that for you? Where are you headed? What is your vision? What is the dream that you have? What is the dream that you haven't shared with anyone else? What goals have you set for yourself? Maybe it's that job that you've so desperately been envious of. That one thing that you want to do in life more than anything else. That one promotion that you want. That one title that you want. Maybe that's your promised land. Maybe it's financial stability. Maybe wherever you're at today, you just want to get to that place, and your promised land would be that you don't have to live paycheck to paycheck any longer. That you would just be in that land of plenty where it's just gushing forth, right? Who in this room would deny that we want to be at that place? Maybe that's what it is for you. Maybe some of you are like, no, I've been there, done that with the work thing. I'm ready to retire. That's my promised land. I'm ready to give it all up. I'm ready to be able to travel. I'm ready to be able to spend more time with my grandkids. I want to move past all that. Maybe some of you are here and you're like, man, my promised land right now would just be a vibrant, healthy marriage. Just want my marriage to be whole, complete, life-giving. Maybe some of you are thinking, I just want to be married. That's my promised land right now, is that I've been going through this wilderness, or what I call wilderness of single life, and I just want to share life with someone else. I just want to get to that place where I'm married. Maybe some of you are in the place where you've been married for a while, and the promised land for you is to start a family. You want to have kids. Or maybe some of you just want to have grandkids, and you realize that that's completely, totally out of your control. Maybe some of you, the promised land is you've come up to a place where you realize you can't have kids on your own, and so what it would mean for you is to be able to bring kids into your home through adoption or foster care. Maybe some of you, I don't know, maybe there's somebody in this room that sits here this morning that just wants to have a college diploma hanging on their wall. They're so sick and tired of being in school, and the promised land is just to get out, to be done. Maybe for some of you it's high school, whatever it is. I would just ask you this morning, where are you headed? What's that picture in your mind? What's that visual image? What's your dream, your vision for your life? Where are you going? So on this journey that God's had me on, as part of this journey in the last 3 months, I turned 44 years old. I've been married for more than half of my life, incredibly happy in that marriage. I've got 2 boys who are incredibly life-giving most days. One who's about to go off to college, another who's about to enter high school. I've been doing ministry for 10 years now, paid ministry. Before that, I worked in. And as I think about this picture of where I'm headed and this journey that God has had me on for the last 3 months and what He's been speaking into my life, what I've been wrestling with is this. I'm not really sure exactly what that picture is. I can't hang it on the wall for you. I hope by the end of this journey I'll be able to do that. But where I'm at today is this. After 44 years, more than anything else, I just want my life to matter. I just want it to count. Like everything I do, everything I say, the people that I invest in, the church that I lead, all of the things that I do, I want to spend my time making sure I'm doing things for the kingdom that make an eternal difference. Like if I were to leave this earth today, I want to know that what I've done has made an impact. It's made a difference. That's the picture. I've been begging God for the last few weeks to just make that a little bit more clear. But that's where I'm at on this journey. And I'm understanding that it's not so much about the destination, it's about what God is doing in me on the journey. For Aldersgate, we use 3 words all the time: connect, love, and impact. That's what it is for us. It's connecting people to God. That's what it's all about. Loving others, especially those in our world who don't feel loved. And impacting the world, making a difference, making it matter. That's the picture of where we're headed. That's the picture of where we're going. That's what it's all about. If we're going to make the most of this journey, we have to know where we're headed. You have to know where you're headed. You have to have a visual. You have to have a picture. You have to have a dream of where you're going. Without it, you will never get there. The second thing I would share with you is this. You have to stay focused on that picture. Not only do you have to have a picture of where you're headed, you have to stay focused on that picture. You have to keep it in front of you at all times. Because if you don't, it is too easy to get distracted, or even worse, it's easy to look back. That's exactly what God's people. If you'll flip over to Exodus chapter 16. I'm going to start reading in verse 1. So, Moses was the man. He's led the people out of Egypt. They've crossed the Red Sea. They're now in the wilderness. And this is where we pick up in Exodus chapter 16, verse 1. They set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the people of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin. That's interesting to me. Which is between Elim and Sinai on the 15th day of the second month. I want you to catch that. On the 15th day of the second month. I want you to understand, they have not been doing this that long. They've got 40 years. They're on the 15th day of the second month. On the 15th day of the second month, after they had departed from the land of Egypt, and the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, "Would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full, for you have brought me with hunger." Do you understand what they were doing here? They were saying, oh, we just want to go back to the good old days. Moses and Aaron, do you remember the good old days when we sat by the meat pot? I mean, we never went hungry. We had all the bread we could ever hope for. Those were the good old days. Moses and Aaron, just take us back to the good old days. The problem is that the good old days weren't that great. They were slaves. They were in bondage. They were in oppression. They were forced to work sun up to sundown. They were beaten. They were killed. The good old days weren't that great. But yet, because they lost sight of where they were headed, they thought where they were was a much better place. Have you ever been there? The other day, well, it was actually longer than the other day. This was a few months ago. I was back in my 2004 Toyota 4Runner out of our garage. And I wasn't paying attention, and when I was backing out, I hit the side mirror on the side of the garage. Please tell me somebody else in this room has done that. Thank you. Glass shattered everywhere. If it would have been my kid, I would have killed him, right? But glass shattered everywhere, and so I drove for a few weeks without this side mirror, and finally I decided I should probably order the side mirror, and so I did, and I ordered it, and I thought it was going to be real simple. It comes in, you just snap it right on there, right? Not so simple. So I messed with it for a little while, and I got frustrated with it, and I just threw it in the car. This was months ago. That side mirror is still sitting in my car. It's never been put on. Every time Michael Christian gets in my car, it drives him nuts. He's like, dude, you got to put that mirror on. And here's what I've learned in the last 3 months. I don't need it. I drive better without it than I did with it. I've learned that I don't really need to look that way. In fact, here's what I learned. Did you know in the state of Texas you can get an inspection sticker without either side mirror? You don't need it. Have you ever thought, just think about this today when you get in your car and you leave here. Think about the size of your windshield compared to the size of your rearview mirror. What does that tell you? It's much more important to look in front of you versus behind you. Now listen, the rearview mirror's there for a reason, right? You can't get an inspection sticker in the state of Texas without a rearview mirror. Because every once in a while you need to glance behind you and see what's back there, or to see where you've been. But if you spend all your time looking in the rearview mirror, what's going to happen? I grew up on a ranch, a farm, so unfortunately I had to drive a tractor a lot of days. And man, I would be driving that tractor, and early on when I would drive the tractor, I made some really critical mistakes. Because I'd be driving the tractor, right? And tractors don't have rearview mirrors, or they don't when I was driving tractors. In fact, they barely had cabs when I was driving tractors. And I'd drive this tractor, and I would want to know what was behind me for some reason. And so I'm driving the tractor, right? And I turn to look behind me. And you know what I do when I turn to look behind me? And then all of a sudden, I start noticing that I just the other, all because I behind to me. The past is important. It shapes us. But the past is not near as important as where you're headed. And it's so easy for us to get caught up in the past and even begin to think, oh, the good old days. If I could just go back to those days. If you think about those days for a while, they weren't that good. And if you keep that picture in front of you of where God's taking you, the picture of where God's taking you is much better than the picture of where He had you. The place that God has for you is much better than the place He had for you. Stay focused on the picture in front of you. The third thing I want to share with you this morning to make the most of the journey is this. Pay attention to the landmarks along the way. While you're on the road, pay attention to the landmarks. Any of you take road trips where you go by the same place often and you can't wait to see that landmark? Or when you see that landmark, it tells you that you're getting close or you're halfway or, oh my gosh, we've got forever to go. So the ranch I grew up on was around Earth, Texas. If you don't know where that's at, it's all right. But when I was 5, my family moved from the panhandle of Texas. And so most of my family was still up in the panhandle. And so from Earth, it was about an hour-and-a-half drive to Amarillo, which is what was central for most of my family because most of them lived in and around Amarillo. We had a few prodigals. There's still prodigals there in Oklahoma. But we hope someday they come to their senses and come back to Texas. But we would make this journey from the ranch to Amarillo often. And I remember as a little kid, that journey landmark. It was this big cowboy. It was a big cowboy statue. Some of you know what I'm talking about, don't you? It was outside this restaurant in Canyon. I don't even know anything about the restaurant. To this day, I don't know anything about the restaurant. I don't know if it's still there. I don't know anything about it. But I know the cowboy is still there. And every time we passed that cowboy, I would celebrate because that meant we were there. I mean, I know we still had like 15 more miles to go, but we were there. Now, when we returned home, it wasn't quite the celebration because we were like, oh my gosh, that's a long ways to go still. But we celebrated the landmark. I want you to think about God's people in the wilderness and all the landmarks that He gave on dry land. And when they got into the wilderness, the reason they were complaining is because they were hungry. And so you know what God said? All right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to send quail into your camp, and all you got to do is get up and go collect them. And if that's not enough, then every morning I'm going to rain bread from heaven. That's literally what it says. Manna. That every morning they would get up and they would walk outside and this bread would literally cover the ground. It had been rained from heaven and they would go and collect enough just for that day. Then they got thirsty. There was no water, so several different occasions God had to mark the place. He would have to give them water. One time He had Moses throw the staff into this lake, and this water that was bitter now became drinkable. And then one time they needed water, they got it out of a rock. Guys, water came out of a rock. One day they were trying to battle Amalek, and Moses went up on the mountain. He had Aaron and Hur with him, and as long as Moses kept his arm up, the Israelites were winning, but if his arms fell, they began to lose. And so Aaron and Hur came alongside of him and helped hold his arms up, and the people got to witness this, and they won the battle over Amalek. They saw the construction of the tabernacle. Man, we've had the tabernacle experience at Aldersgate for a couple of times now. This life-size replica of the Old Testament tabernacle. It's amazing. They built it. There's chapter after chapter after chapter in Exodus of how intricate and how detailed this thing was. And here's the most amazing thing, that when they built the tabernacle, there was this cloud. God's literal presence hung over the tabernacle by day. And at night, that cloud turned to fire. And I have to think to myself, the first few days, they were probably like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. How long into the wilderness did it just become an everyday thing? An everyday landmark. Something that they just grew accustomed to. You see, because when God was ready for them to move, he moved through the cloud. And they followed the cloud by day and the fire by night. At what point during the 40-year journey did that just become the normal? And at what point on our journeys, the landmarks that God gives to us, these amazing moments, these amazing times that God gives to us, do we miss because we're more concerned about the destination? You see, I think that's what God is doing in me. I think that's what God is doing in us as a church, is reminding us that it's not just about where we're headed. It's about where we're at and what he's doing in our lives. I know that you have visions. I know that you have dreams of where God's taking you. And I know that you want to be encouraged to stay focused on that picture, but you don't know if it's going to take 4 days or 40 years. Will you be present in the moment along the journey? I want to just read this to you. This is out of Exodus chapter 19. This is one of the things they experienced. This is one of the landmarks. Exodus 19, verse 16. On the morning of the third day, there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people in the camp trembled. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke, because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. And as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him in thunder. I wonder, how many times is God doing that to you and to me on the journey, and we miss it? It's not just where we're headed and staying focused on that picture. It's being present in the here and now and looking for the landmarks that God is putting before us right now in our lives right now. God did this through several different ways while they were traveling in the wilderness. He instituted all these feasts that they were to commemorate ever so often. They fell like clockwork to help them remember the landmarks. The 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, they could celebrate where God had them at that moment. And so that's what we're going to do this morning. We're going to celebrate communion. We haven't done that since we've been over at All Saints. Logistically, it's just a little bit complicated. So we're going to do it a little different this morning. Are y'all okay with that? Because it could just be a landmark on the journey. So I'm going to ask those that we've asked to come and help us this morning. And they're going to take these baskets and they're going to begin to walk up. You guys can come on down and grab these. They're going to walk up the steps to you. They're going to hand the baskets to you. You pass them down your row, your aisle, and make sure everybody has one of these. All right? Now, I know a lot of you are like, oh, that way? Listen to me. Don't you think that's what the Israelites did when manna came on the 365th day? All right, you guys go ahead and begin to pass those out. Everyone take one of these and just hold on to it for now. Don't do anything with it. Just keep it in your hand. And I want you to think, as you take this in your hand, what's the vision? What's the dream? What's the goal? Where is God taking me? And am I staying focused on that image, that dream, that vision? Am I paying attention to what God is doing in the here and now? Am I paying attention to what God is doing in my life right now? Am I so focused on where I want to be that I'm missing what God is doing today? in my life. You should think about those landmarks that God gave to the Israelites: the manna, the water, the quail, the battles, the tabernacle, the 10 Commandments, the fire, the cloud. Where's God doing in that in your life today?